Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we have another early impression video, and we are sticking with the house of Roja Dove. Roja Week continues basically, and it actually may continue into the weekend because there's still a handful of Rojas that I want to review on the channel. I've actually been sitting on this one for a couple years now. Somebody sent me these samples actually they sent me the Roja collection sample set. And this is one of the ones that was in it, and it's called Sweetie Aoud Parfum, which is one of the ones that has survived the big cut down. It seems like Roja went through a ton of discontinuations. And the more Rojas that I review, I've listened to him kind of make a little bit of an excuse, and I'm going to start this with a ramble because I've listened to him make a little bit of an excuse when they asked him, how come you have so many fragrances that get released, And he was like, well, we're a new house, we have to put out a bunch of fragrances because we're a new house. But that excuse doesn't really hold water anymore. I feel like they have released a ton of stuff and then discontinued a ton of stuff. And it does feel like a cash grab. To an outsider looking in, it feels like a cash grab, especially once I talk about some of the similarities in the sense. It really feels like they were releasing for the point of releasing. And then when you take the fact that he also has that Pierre de Valet brand, which is fragrances that smell like other Roja fragrances in a different brand, it really feels like he's just, fleecing the ultra rich that are willing to spend $1,000, $750, $500 a bottle, whatever it is, right? But again, this is just an outsider's part looking in. So today we're going to talk about Sweetie Aoud, and I'm going to do a fresh spray at the request of many of you have said you need to spray more on camera. So here we go. I'm going to try to spray this for you guys. So there you go. We're going to spray away. Right before bed, I'll be smelling of Sweetie Aoud. So I actually have the dry down here. So we have the opening now here. There you go. There's the fresh spray for you guys asking for a spray. This is basically Roja's take on a gourmand. The opening to me smells like it has slight hazelnut aspects. Even though there aren't any hazelnut notes listed, I always get this strange little hazelnut thing. Yeah, and I'm getting it again right now. It has this, ground hazelnut on top of a coffee or something. It gets me every time. There's no hazelnut listed, but that is one of the weird parts of the gourmand aspect, which I do get. So one of my subscribers basically left a comment saying that Roja is a master of sort of understanding the history of perfume and vintage fragrances, and he is the king of Chypre fragrances. And I said, mate, I 100% agree with you, but the guy said he does not know Oud. And I said, man, I agree with you there as well, my friend. I think this is one of the fragrances where two things will come into play in a big way depending on how you see this fragrance, okay? Which side of the road you stand on. Number one, where you are in your Oud journey, okay? Now, some people say I'm an Oud snob. I think I have gone deeper into the rabbit hole than most folks, than 99% of folks will go. I still enjoy wearing what I would consider now Western style Oud, so I still enjoy wearing the Oud Woods and the Versace Pour Homme Oud Noir, or Versace Pour Homme, is it Oud Noir? Whatever the Versace Oud is. And those type of Oud fragrances I will still wear. I will still wear those type of Ouds that, my guess would be there is very little real Oud in, okay? But if you're wearing Jinx and Sherwood and Arise Ladore and Ensar and Rising Phoenix and all these type of brands, you're probably past this. This is more a starter take on Oud, in my opinion, from the way that I view it, okay? This would be a little bit of a letdown, especially at Roja prices, right? Because you have to be, I think, a little bit subjective with where you spend your money, especially when you get into this price sphere. This is in the stratosphere. This is $765 for 100 ml, which is absolutely a knife to the heart. No matter who you are, that is a lot of money in my opinion. And even if this is supposed to be, as I heard the brand say, a yummy Oud, whether it's a yummy Oud or not, $765 is a lot of dough. A lot of dough. So number two, you have to like gourmand fragrances. Do you like fragrances that have this food element to it? And I know Mark from the Robes 08 channel came and did an interview with me, and it may have came up in the interview, or maybe we were just talking backstage, but he mentioned that he likes gourmands a little bit more than I do, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just your personal taste. So if you like gourmand fragrances, this may be one for you to try out. To be fair, this is not one of those gourmand fragrances that smells like a chef is making Cinnabon rolls and they just dump the whole bag of sugar and cinnamon in the mixer and blended it all together. This is a very well balanced fragrance. I have to say that right out of the gate. Okay, this is a very well, surprisingly well balanced, especially for a brand, a name called Sweetie Aoud. Okay, to me, they offset the gourmand aspects is basically what they've done. Yes, they call it a gourmand, but you're going to get a lot of spice. You're going to get cardamom and cumin. You're going to get guarjum, cypriol, patchouli, cedarwood, gaiac wood, oud wood, juniper, amyris, frankincense. Actually, the frankincense is pretty prominent here. I'm getting it already right now. Labdanum, and resins and stuff like that. So to be frank, if you've smelled some of his other creations, and I have done a ton of work on the House of Roja, so if you have smelled things like Sultanate of Oman, which is right here, Sultanate of Oman. If you've smelled this, right, which is probably one of my favorites from this Middle Eastern collection because it does use a lot of resins and frankincense and stuff like that. Probably one of my favorite incense fragrances too. If you've smelled this, if you've smelled Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, especially those first two, this Sultanate of Oman and Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which I have reviewed on the channel off of a Discovery Atomizer, which is God knows where. If you've smelled Majestic Oud, if you've smelled UAE, if you've smelled Taif Oud, if you've smelled O the Exclusive Parfum and H the Exclusive Parfum, I have reviews on all of those on the channel. So again, etc., etc., etc. I have done a ton of work on the House of Roja. Basically, if you know Roja's Oud Accord, the way that I would describe this is the first hour, you're going to get a lot of bits and pieces of Sultanate of Oman. The next couple hours, you're going to get a lot more bits and pieces of Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And then there's a third fragrance which just hovers overhead like a vulture, and we'll talk about why that is later on. But you're going to get lots of bits and pieces of previous Roja creations inside of this Sweetie Aoud. You're going to get the sticky resins from Sultanate of Oman, and you're going to get what I would call the fruity style of Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I mean, if you told me there was raspberries and strawberries and all the crazy shit that's in Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in Sweetie Aoud, I would believe you. Cotton candy would fit perfect in here. Okay, this fruity oud style, I would believe you. But that's counterweighted. It's kind of counterweighted to this sweet gourmand creation in the top. Actually, for a gourmand, right? And you would think I would hate this because I am not a fan of sweet fragrances at all. That's probably one of my least favorite categories, right? But as I've said already, for a gourmand, I think they did a great job balancing this. It's very well done, to be fair, okay? To be 100% Switzerland, I'm middle of the road and 100% honest. I was actually very pleasantly surprised at how well balanced this is, okay? So if this is your thing, I can easily recommend it. It's just not my thing at this point is the problem. But here's what I want you to imagine, right? Since I'm reviewing it, I'm trying to be middle of the road. So imagine Roja wants you to put this in your head. Imagine you have wisps of frankincense and oud being burned in the most opulent of Middle Eastern palaces. Meanwhile, your personal chef is making you the most sumptuous and delicate and flaky puff pastry, French style, that you could ever imagine. It's hot and steamy. When you open it up, the steam escapes from the pastry. It's fresh out of the oven, because he's making it for you. He is employed by you. The outside is crispy golden brown. Meanwhile, the inside is soft and cushy. The balance between sort of being fully cooked, where the outer edges have that laminated look, and the inside still being soft and properly done is absolutely perfect. That's also perfectly balanced, right? That's the image of, I think, this bread-like smell that comes through in Sweetie Aoud. So for me, this is classic Roger Bird. This is classic Roger Bird to a T, because this is where I think his genius and marketing and salesmanship comes through. This is where it becomes so important. This is where he took a brand from the ground floor and basically turned it into a Goliath because of his marketing techniques and selling the scents, in my opinion. Because if you read the blurb, which I feel like I should do, but in a second, you will realize that his descriptor of this scent is such a, he sells it perfectly. I mean, it's a genius blurb. Reading this like from an outsider, just what I would say, I have a huge interest in the marketing side of fragrances. Genius blurb, genius backstory for me. But when you get to the note listing, you'll realize that the two don't mesh in my opinion. The note listing is like this weird classic note listing, which is, if you know Roja's fragrances, you know he loves classic style note listings. He doesn't fall into the trap of kind of creating a blurb and then creating a fragrance that becomes too much of a cliche. He doesn't create a fragrance that just smells like a pastry shop. The pastry shop is interwoven into this very classical style, is how I would describe it. So here, I feel like, to me, this is basically Kingdom of Saudi Arabia blended with Sultanate of Oman and topped with some sweet notes, right? The sweet notes are the blending into the rest of these very complex creations that I'm sure Roja, or, as some have sort of guessed over the years, maybe whatever group of ghost perfumers or people working on his staff who help him have created these accords, right? But the thing is, I don't know if I was smelling this blind, if I would go, oh yes, absolutely, this is flaky pastry dough and melted butter and all this. What I will tell you is that the very first thing that came to mind when I smelled this, and this was years ago for the first time, I've been working my way through this decant for many a years now. And so I've God knows how many times I've just sprayed this on before bed randomly and experienced it. But the very first time I smelled this, I thought Guerlain. And you know which Guerlain hit me? It was Tonka Impériale. Tonka Impériale was the very first thing that come to mind with Sweetie Aoud. And because Tonka Impériale, to me, gives you this feeling of like you literally just walked past this bakery fresh in the morning, very, very almondy. In fact, Thierry Vasser made almond. Almond and Guerlain have sort of a long history. And it was so influential, I would say, that Tonka Impériale was one of the earlier La Matin, I forgot what this collection was called. But whatever this higher end Guerlain collection is, they made Tonka kind of like a focused note in one of his first creations for this line in 2010. Early on when he took on the in-house perfumer at Guerlain. And then what he ended up doing is he ended up using Tonka as like the main theme for the entire L'Homme Idéal line, which is kind of like their more designer line geared towards men, which I actually really like. It's very Guerlain-esque. He really did a great job studying Guerlain's back history and then creating something that, falls into that history, if you will. And it revolves around the note of almond. So, again, very strange happenstance that yet another Roja Dove pops into Guerlain territory. Very first thing that popped into my mind, Tonka Impériale, right? Minus that weird kind of hazelnut thing, which has already basically gone away. That's just this weird quirk in the opening of Sweetie Aoud, I think. And maybe it's purposeful too. Maybe it almost feels like sometimes Roja wants to throw you off the scent a little bit. He doesn't want it to be so easy to nail down. So I feel like sometimes he does stuff like that to try to make you go down a path that's a dead end. I know that is extremely pessimistic of me to say, but it does feel that way sometimes when I'm smelling these Rojas. So again, it is very interesting. Another Guerlain pops into my head, but instead of heading down the path of tobacco and rosemary and all this stuff, Sweetie Aoud brilliantly sits on this Cypriol heavy oud accord that Roja and his team built and created and have used in many, many things over and over again, like Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Sultanate of Oman, etc. And another one we're going to talk about soon. In fact, if you blindfolded me, I would say this had the same kind of strawberry, cotton candy, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia blend, this fruity kind of blend. And when I use the term that this is kind of brilliantly created, I don't mean that, this is such a genius creation that you have to run out and buy it. I mean, from the brand's point of view, this is I think, a genius kind of stroke that the brand focused on, because it's hard to explain, but I think what they did is they basically created like this kind of blueprint, and then riffed off of it, Roja'd these different fragrances up, as I've called it, over the time. We'll dive deeper into that thought process in a little bit, but to me, I think Sweetie Oud would fit brilliantly into this Middle Eastern line that they've done. I think everything got the axe in this Middle Eastern line, by the way, except this one, Sultanate of Oman, Qatar, and UAE. Everything else is off the Roja website. So, all the other ones that they used to have, and I've done some reviews on some of the off the beaten path ones. They're all out. All of them are out. Okay, so enough rambling. Let me read you the actual blurb, and then we'll dive a little deeper into this scent. So here's the blurb according to the current Roja website. The yummy oud. Entering a world of indulgence, Sweetie Oud teleports you to a grand Arabian palace. In the royal kitchen, a French pastry chef causes the smell of melted butter, caramelized sugar, and toasted almond to mingle in the air with the scent of agarwood and frankincense burning from bachors. The addictive quality of this sweet oud perfume is balanced by dry wood and leather notes to create the perfect gourmand perfume. So here's what Roja says. A highly original interpretation of a traditional oud style fragrance. We will get to that. Sweetie Oud evolves the legendary material into something thoroughly contemporary and unexpected. Again, marketing genius. Rarely seen in perfumery, the ancient note of oud is transformed into a mouth-watering gourmand composition which is impossible to resist. The elegance of rose de mai and the balsamic beauty of frankincense mingle with the unique pastry accord as the whole wraps around the focal ingredient of oud. Meanwhile, spices, woods, and resins create a deep and mysterious base which enables the delicious sweetness to resonate softly throughout the day. Reminiscent of the delectable pastries in the finest of cake shops, Sweetie Oud is a delectable guilty pleasure for the senses. A totally contemporary design which can only come from the mind of the master of oud, Roja himself. Holy fucking shitballs. Okay, so... God, how do you even recover from that last line? So, if you notice where I'm going with this review before I just got completely blindsided, I actually did not read that last line until just now, but it's a very classical style creation created by the man, the creative director, whoever's sitting in the seat making these decisions. They have a very solid understanding of, perfumery types, how everything fits together in this vintage style and traditionally where the notes go, but with very modern materials and modern marketing, okay? So that is perfectly represented when you first spray the fragrance. So if you read the blurb, you think, oh my God, I'm gonna get this assaulted with sweet sugar candies and pastries and butter and almonds. And one fellow reviewer who reviewed this said, it's yummy, yummy, yummy. That is the expectation, I would say, if you're going blind. But to my nose, those sweeter details are woven into the tapestry of the scent brilliantly. The details. That's why someone would pay this crazy money for this, is really the details. And what's interesting is you're greeted with, yes, I mentioned hazelnut in the beginning, but really the top notes are Artemisia and bergamot, okay? Bergamot and Artemisia are the two top notes, which is basically a very traditional and classical start, right? Artemisia has this very bitter, slightly earthy, pungent, almost like camphor-like sharpness without actually smelling camphoraceous, if that makes sense. Very, very, very woody. It's a staple in vintage perfumery, and I think sets the tone for what is to come, which is basically what smells like, to me, a classic fruity chypre. And again, Roja is the king of chypres. You do get the sweet and gourmand kind of notes interwoven in, the bread-like warmth amped up a little bit here and there. But there is very little, I think, that will surprise you. Like if you are familiar with Roja's creations, it's very complex, like many other Rojas are. There's a lot going on. It feels like he took one of his creations and then Roja'd it up. Like he Roja'd up a creation that was already something else. He Roja'd up of a vintage fragrance. It feels like a previous creation he took and Roja'd it up. The candied notes sometimes feel like they apply to the florals. Like sometimes when I smell it, even just now, I just got this candied, and almost the rose itself feels like it's dipped in candy and hardened. So Sometimes the May rose feels kind of like a candied rose. I will admit, I like the way the spices, the woods, and especially that smoky frankincense part of the fragrance kind of comes through. That's the part that really surprised me the most, is that underneath all of this, they're focusing the marketing on the sweet pastry, you know, fluffy pastry, butter, all this stuff. But really, the part that interested me was the frankincense, the incense, the resins, that kind of thing. That's the part that really caught my attention. Now, I've often talked about Roja being the master of like creating a mold and then using it over and over and over again in different creations. Just go watch my review on O, the exclusive parfum, versus H, the exclusive parfum. Go watch my Amber Oud Pressio video I just did, versus the original Amber Oud. You know, many examples of this happen over and over again, okay? I have done 36 Roja videos on the channel. Again, 36. Now, not all of them are individual reviews. One or two is probably a list. But to be fair, most of those are individually focused reviews. So you just have to discuss the similarities. It is impossible to do this type of video and not discuss the similarities, in my opinion. So just let me give you an example. Let me read you a full note listing of Sweetie Aoud, which we're discussing today. And then let me read you a full note listing of PDLN 3, Parfum de la Nuit number 3, which I reviewed on the channel. There's a full review of this on the channel, okay? Just let me read you the full note listings of the two, and then I will pick your jaw off the floor, and we'll continue. So here is the note listing for Sweetie Aoud. Artemisia and bergamot in the top, cistus and May rose in the heart, with a base of sweet notes, frankincense, gaiac wood, amyris, cardamom, cedarwood, cypriol, guardium balsam, juniper wood, labdanum, oud, patchouli, and cumin. Okay, now let's do Parfum de la Nuit number 3. Bergamot and Artemisia in the top, with a heart of May rose and cistus, with a base of amyris, frankincense, cumin, labdanum, leather, styrax, ambergris, gaiac wood, saffron, benzoin, cardamom, cypriol, guardium balsam, juniper, patchouli, sandalwood, and cedarwood. Now, obviously, you could probably pick out the couple notes that are different. You know, PDLN 3 has leather and saffron, you know, and styrax. Sweetie Aoud has sweet notes and juniper wood, which is not listed in PDLN 3. Well, they list juniper, but not juniper wood. Anyways, but we're splitting hairs. But if that note listing did not completely take you back and give you a perfect example of what I'm talking about, where it feels like Roja's team has basically created this, you know, mold of a fragrance that obviously smells great. You know, it's a luxury smelling fragrance, and then they tweak a little bit here and there, and put out a whole new marketing blurb, and bam, you have a whole new fragrance, right? With just a little bit tweaked here and there off of that Roja mold that was created. And like I said, I think once you have smelled a lot of these, and then for me reviewing them, of course, it feels a little disingenuous from the brand. It feels a little bit like a cash grab. You know, like I said, the marketing department makes them all squeaky and clean, and they spit shine them, and they just fucking put them out, and people buy them, obviously. I mean, the brand has just phoenixed to the apex of what I would call the ultra luxury space. And very impressive what he's done with the brand. And again, I'm a fan. Look at my Roja bottles here. Look at them here. But, you know, there are some things that are amped up in one and not amped up in another. But this is a great example of kind of how he plays the field. The note listing, the leather note in PDLN 3 is amped up. And so I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer here. Obviously, Oud is listed in Sweetie Aoud. It's not in PDLN 3. But sometimes Oud can smell leathery. And so there's definitely this interconnectivity between them. And just the similarity is beyond impressive. And that happens over and over and over in some of Roja's work. So, and I have some friends who refuse to buy a Roja because they say he's just too smooth. You know, he's too smooth of a talker. Like, he can sell ice to the Eskimos. He can sell anyone anything. And they just refuse to be sold. They just say, you know, I'm not going to buy anything from him because he is just way too smooth of an operator. And I just feel like I'm being sold. I feel like I'm being taken for a ride. And, you know, the old saying, if you look around the table and you don't know who the sucker is, the sucker very well may be you. Now, um, I like Roja's style. Obviously, I have a lot of Rojas. I've focused a lot of time on the channel talking about Rojas. I'm not saying you can't enjoy these, because obviously I enjoy his creations. But when you get to doing all these different reviews, you have to almost talk about the similar. It's impossible not to. You'd be remiss not to. Let's put it that way. Okay. Now, 2024, September of 2024, would I buy this for my collection where I sit today and talk to you? No, hell no. To be fair, if you gave it to me, I would wear it, because I think it's Sweetie Aoud is just as complex and interesting as some of the Rojas that I own and wear and appreciate. But I think, you know, this suffers the issue of sameness. I would just wear Sultanate of Oman and be happy. You know, there's no reason for me to go out and get Sweetie Aoud is part of the problem. And if you look at some of the advertisements of these older oud creations, Sweetie Aoud is one such example. And to be frank, to be honest, again, I'm trying to be Switzerland here. The newer, if you go to Roja's website today, he has cut back on this sort of advertisements. But, you know, back in the day, the original advertisement for Sweetie Aoud would show a big chunk of oud here and a huge rose de mai there, and, you know, maybe like a little pastry or something in the front, and all these rare materials all around the bottle. And as I've said, I'm not going to go into how much real oud, how much real rose, is there real oud, is there not, whatever the brand says, you kind of go with. But as I've said before, for me, I enjoy this type of perfumery, but the oud accord feels very Cypriol heavy. You know, it feels like a Cypriol heavy smelling oud if you're picking up what I'm putting down. And so before all the Roja heads come to my defense, I'm kind of a Roja head in my own right with all the Rojas that I own. You know, I mean, when you have a fragrance that says oud in the name, you just kind of expect, I think, you just expect more. I think it's heavily implied from the old advertising that there was all this huge amounts of oud and stuff like that. That's what it seems like to me as an outsider. Now, as I've said, the brand has gotten away from that type of advertising, maybe for that exact type of reason. I don't know. But, you know, if I was spending my own hard-earned money right now, September of 2024, I would be spending it on the artisanal houses, the ones where they're using large amounts of real high-quality ouds. And, you know, you may have 10 to 30% of the formula high-quality ouds. And so here, if I had to take a guess, it feels like if there is real oud, which I'm not convinced that there is. Again, I asked somebody to send me a clip of Roja saying he uses real oud in his creations. Again, I think it's heavily implied in some of the videos that he did. He did one where he was sitting in front of 3 giant chunks of oud, like talked about living in the Middle East and all this stuff. But I've never actually heard him say, I use real oud in my creations. I've heard him say, I use real ambergris. Never heard him say, I use real oud. And so, but if there is real oud in here, I would venture to guess it's potentially, probably less than 1%. And so my guess is it's probably more of an oud accord that's being used. And again, oud is in the name. That's what it says on the bottle, Sweetie Aoud. So you have to touch on this. You have to touch on this, unfortunately. Now, I enjoy it either way. You know, even though in the back of my head, I think it's probably more of an accord. I don't know that. Like I said, you got to go with what the brand says. But for me, this is a beginner's oud. This is a beginner's oud that's very well balanced, but it's a beginner's oud nonetheless. So for this very Cypriol heavy smelling oud, this would be a pass for me in 2024. The bubblegum cotton candy oud thing going on with all the fruitiness, you know, better than you would expect for this type of creation. Better than I expected when I smelled it. I expected to hate this one. And actually, I don't. I actually really like it. I think it's a good example of a oud that has some of those underlying nuances in there. Or let's just say a Roja fragrance instead of saying an oud. Let's say a Roja fragrance that has some of these underlying nuances in there. The buttery, pastry, the sweet notes, the cotton candy, all that stuff, the bubblegum accord. but nonetheless, it's a pass for me. So anyways, that's my take on Sweetie Oud. If you have different experiences, I would love to hear your thoughts. You know, these little early impression videos are fun to do because I don't own a bottle. I never would get to do it otherwise. There's still maybe one or two more that I want to do. I want to do the original Oud, and I want to do Burlington 1819, and I want to do Elysium. Elysium is, those three are kind of like some of the last Roja samples that I have not done videos on yet. So thanks for watching as always. We'll see if Roja Week continues or if I go somewhere else, depending on how much I can focus on one brand like this nonstop. I know you guys like kind of the weeks where we focus on a particular brand, and I do too, but it gives me an excuse to kind of knock some of these out one by one by one. More to come one way or another, whether we go in a different direction tomorrow or Saturday, or, you know, stick with the House of Roja. But as always, I love hearing your feedback. Thanks for watching, everyone. Cheers, guys. Catch you next time. Bye-bye.